Once upon a time, there lived two friends in a village named Adolisa and Azuka. Adolisa and Azuka were both farmers who lived adjacent to each other. Adolisa and Azuka helped their parents most times in the farm, as women were believed to wield good luck, which allowed crops grow so well. During the last harvesting season, Azuka's parents harvested and sold numerous crops, which fetched them so much money. Adolisa, however, struggled with her parents as they barely had enough to feed. One day, whilst Adolisa and Azuka were heading to the farm, they saw a very old woman who pleaded with them to help her plant some crops in her farm. The old woman was too frail to engage in the strenuous work of planting and harvesting, so the old woman had not been able to plant crops in her farm for years. The old woman then pleaded with them to help her for free, as she could not afford to pay them for their services. Azuka laughed at the old woman, saying that she rather stayed at home doing nothing than help a wretched-looking woman plant crops in her farm. Azuka went on to say that if the old woman was unable to plant the crops herself, then she was not deserving of the harvest. This broke the old woman's heart, as tears began to drop from her eyes. Adolisa, on seeing how Azuka treated the old woman, had compassion for her and agreed to plant the crops in the old woman's farm for free. Adolisa did this despite knowing that her presence was greatly needed at her parents' farm. This infuriated Azuka, who began to insult Adolisa for her decision to help the poor old woman. But Adolisa paid no mind to Azuka and proceeded to help the old woman plant the crops in her farm. Adolisa got home that day, tired and famished. She had not eaten all day and had no food at home to eat. She approached Azuka to beg for some food, but Azuka refused because she was still furious at Azuka about what happened earlier with the old woman. Azuka called Adolisa a fool for agreeing to help the old woman in her farm for free and told her to eat her kindness, since that was all she was good at. The next morning, Adolisa went back to the old woman's farm to continue her work. When the old woman saw her, she could tell that something was bothering Adolisa, so she approached her to ask what was going on. Adolisa told the old woman her whole story and how she had to sleep without food the previous night because they had no money or food at home. The old woman was touched as she went into her small hut to bring out a small pot of soup for Adolisa. Adolisa was so excited as she began to eat some of the food and proceeded to take the rest home for her family. Several months passed, and the old woman's crops began to grow, and the old woman was so grateful to Adolisa. Adolisa and her family had been living from hand to mouth for months, but remained hopeful for the next harvesting season. Azuka, on the other hand, continued to act unkind towards Adolisa, and this soon affected their relationship as Azuka stopped associating and talking to Adolisa. One hot afternoon, this was during the harvesting season, Azuka's father returned home from the farm extremely happy. He met the richest man in the village who promised to buy off all his crops. Azuka was so excited to hear this. So they went on to harvest all the crops they had planted and took them to the rich man's house. To their surprise, the rich man turned them down, saying that he was no longer interested in buying the crops. Azuka and her father were in complete shock as they never saw this coming. They returned home sad and wondered what had gone wrong. Few days later, each man's house to find out why he changed his mind when she suddenly saw Adolisa and her father selling their crops to the rich man. Azuka was so furious as she began to rain insults at Adolisa, accusing her of poisoning the mind of the rich man towards them. As Azuka was shouting, she heard someone approaching them, and to her greatest surprise, Azuka saw the old woman she insulted and refused to help months ago. Azuka was in shock as she wondered what the old woman was doing in the rich man's house. It was then that the old woman revealed to them that she was the rich man's mother and the mastermind behind all the wealth that everyone could see. The old woman was in charge of all the businesses and wealth that people believed belonged to the rich man. The old woman then went on to reveal that she was the one who instructed her son to turn Azuka and her father back because of how Azuka treated her in the past. She told Azuka that she was undeserving of her money because of her rudeness and wickedness. The old woman there and then gave Adolisa the land that she helped her plant some crops on months ago. Adolisa was extremely excited as she was now the owner of the very big land and the crops planted on it. The old woman's son also picked an interest in Adolisa and many months later asked her to marry him and she accepted. They got married and Adolisa and her family never lacked anything in life. However, Azuka and her family were unable to sell off all their crops and lost so much money in the process. And Azuka learned her lessons and regretted all her actions. The lesson to be learned from this story is that we should not be rude or disrespectful to people because we do not know what tomorrow holds. Always be kind to others, as a little kindness can heal the world. I hope you enjoyed the story. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It helps us grow our channel. I'll see you in our next story. Bye.